Thank you very much. We'll move back to item 33, Hearings Panel Report to the Council on the Akaroa Treated Wastewater Options. At the time of the adjournment prior to lunch, we were hearing from the chairperson of the Hearings Panel, and if staff could join us at the table for this particular item, and if I could hand back to Sarah to complete her introduction. You've completed your introduction, and we can open it up, and of course we've got staff at the end of the table as well. I just wanted to make a short statement at the beginning of this section, both with questions and with the debate that will follow. And I just want to make a statement. The Council established a hearings panel to investigate and make recommendations to the Council on the disposal of Akaroa wastewater. In the course of doing so, the panel received written and oral submissions from people and organisations affected by or with an interest in the matter. The panel also sought additional information and advice to assist with the panel's deliberations. Those deliberations, including evaluation of the submissions, have been completed, and the Council is about to consider a report from the panel containing its recommendations. The opportunity to make written submissions closed prior to public hearings held some weeks ago. Councillors have recently received correspondence from people with an interest in the Council's decision. The risk with this is that the information contained in the correspondence could affect other people who may have views but no opportunity to respond. In the interest of fairness to all parties, this correspondence must be disregarded and not taken into account when councillors are considering the hearings panel report. So I will now hand over to councillors, and you may ask questions. And if there are no questions...
And it might be a question of you, Leanne. Does that mean that a question on the request for deferral of today's decision would be out of order?
Sorry, I don't know. You can ask that independently of any advice that you've received.
Yep. Yeah. So, given the angst and the concern within the community, there has been a suggestion that today's decision could be deferred, awaiting...
Is this a suggestion that came through after?
So can I just reframe? So that is a suggestion that has come through in the emails.
That was the reason for my initial question.
Andrew, a better question would be what happens if we don't make a decision today? No, that might be a really clear...
Can't take that.
Yeah, if I just ask the question that way.
What are the impacts of not making a decision today? Thank you.
Yeah, that would be a better way of...
Okay, so from a legal point of view, the council started this process in roughly 2007 or 2008. It was around that stage when the Banks Peninsula District Council amalgamated with the Christchurch City Council, that the Christchurch City Council realised that something had to be done about this wastewater. So it started that process 2007, 2008. It sought a temporary short-term consent for ongoing discharge of the treated wastewater to the harbour while it went through that decision-making process. It made a decision in 2011 to continue discharge to harbour, and then sought another short-term consent that expired in 2020. So that short-term consent has now expired. The council has since then lodged a third short-term consent application to run until 2028. If the decision today is deferred in order to, for example, complete the I&I investigations or the I&I works, that's a program that will take about 1.5 to 2 years to do the works, monitor the results, and then decide what, from modelling, what the outcome is for the disposal quantity. So that's a further 2-year delay. That would mean that the council would need to try and amend its current application for another short-term consent to extend it from 2028 to maybe 2030. Also, if the decision is deferred today, As a result of the delays that there have been to date, it will be a harder ask to get consent for the further short-term consent from Environment Canterbury. Because the Commissioners of Environment Canterbury, the hearings panels, have been providing quite a degree of latitude over the last 13 years, which is a reasonable amount of time for a council to make a decision, quite possibly in their view. So it might make it harder to get that consent. It's likely to result in increased opposition to the short-term consent application from the Ngāi Tahu parties. At this stage, if the council's decision has been made for land application, then one would reasonably expect that the Ngāi Tahu parties may be more favourable for that short-term consent and not oppose it so strenuously. It would be quite an adversarial consent application if there was to be a further deferral. On top of that, I'd suggest that if the reason for the deferral is so as to conduct the I&I works, the improvements to the council's wastewater network, if that's the purpose of the deferral, then that purpose has no relevance to the actual decision that the council's being asked to make today, because that actual decision is which one of 4 disposal options is preferred. And the decision has to be made regardless of how much water is going into the wastewater pipes. And that's what the I&I work will determine. It doesn't change the weighing up of those 4 options.
Bridget?
Thank you, Sarah Templeton.
Just make a short comment on the I&I work, because the panel discussed this at length and had various questions on it. And the I&I work, especially now that we've had the shovel-ready funding, will actually be done in time to be able to inform the size of the scheme, even with the current timeframes. Yeah.
Melanie? Oh, I think Sarah would like to move it. Melanie would like to second it. Right. This is a further question.
Just, I don't know if you've got the presentation, but just was really trying to understand Ngāi Tahu's view on the reuse of non-potable water to irrigate parks. Was there any cultural advice that we've taken in that regard?
They were fine with that.
They're supportive of it.
Yeah, they're supported. Yeah, it's going on to land first before it does anything else, and it filters. Yeah.
Right. So there's no issue there. Yep.
And I have noted that the Water Services Bill has been introduced into Parliament and had its first reading, and there will be submissions called for on that. It does prioritise the potable water issue. The second cab off the rank, as it were, in terms of the 3 waters reform is wastewater, and it does require the regulator to gather a lot of information. I will use the opportunity of the submission process to continue to advocate for the blue line. Is it purple line? Purple line. I knew it was a line. The blue line was the last paper. Purple line option for wastewater that has been treated. Thank you. So that's the end of questions. I'll open it up for debate. Would you like to open the debate, or? Okay. Okay. Andrew.
Thank you. I'd like to start by acknowledging the work of the hearings panel. A huge amount of work done in a difficult and trying situation with a huge amount of technical information and a large number of highly motivated submitters as well. So I'd like to acknowledge the work done by the chair and members of the hearings panel. I'd also like to acknowledge the cultural offensiveness of the current wastewater treatment arrangements at Takapuniki, and also acknowledge the work of the Akaroa Wastewater Reuse Options Community Working Party, chaired by Penny Carnaby. A far larger number of meetings than was originally expected, and again dealing with a large amount of technical information. A number of concerns have been raised and have been expressed to the extent that they can be in the resolutions in front of us today. Reducing stormwater ingress into the wastewater network, identifying increased wetland options, maximising planted areas, incentivising behaviours to reduce water use, increasing non-potable reuse, focusing on beneficial reuse rather than simply thinking of this as disposal, and working with other agencies to achieve regulatory reform to allow a wider range of non-potable reuse over time, with the aim of reducing the requirement for storage, the size of the storage ponds, and increasing the biodiversity and sustainability outcomes that are here. I note that the hearings panel dealt with one of the key matters first, that the treated wastewater not be discharged to the harbour. The reality is that harbour discharge is consentable only if the alternatives have been considered and are able to be reasonably discounted. I agree with the panel's view that the alternatives are viable and therefore cannot be reasonably discounted, and it therefore follows that any alternative option requiring harbour discharge would also not be consentable. So there are some good reasons why we need to make this decision today, which were articulated in answer to the question. That was the reason I asked it. Not least the continued discharge to the harbour from the Takapunaki site, and the likelihood that if Council was to delay the decision on the recommendations in front of us today, there would be some risk to the continuation of that consent or the reissue of it. Significant work to be done before we get to building this scheme. The I&I reduction work, consenting, detailed design, and it's my hope and my expectation that when we do get to detailed design, the requirements for storage, because of the other work that will be done, will be much reduced. Regulatory issues regarding non-potable reuse, and I mean this seems like a no-brainer in a community with annual water shortages and a situation that we're trying to resolve here, finding reuse for highly treated wastewater. We've got an opportunity to lead by example with non-potable reuse on public land, and I think there's an opportunity here to be working with agencies to get some changes in the regulatory framework so that a greater range of non-potable reuse can be achieved. So this isn't an ideal situation. I'm very aware of the community views which have been very strongly and very clearly expressed, and I've got a lot of respect for those views. I'd love to have an alternative that was capable of being supported, that better respects the views of the most affected communities. But the reality is that we're constrained by the regulatory framework, by geography, and as we've heard today, by time. So it's therefore with some discomfort and some reluctance, but also with a pragmatic and realistic approach to the situation that we're in here, that I'll be supporting the recommendations in front of us today and taking those as a balanced approach to what has been and what remains a very difficult situation.
Thank you. All right. Did you want to close it?
There you go.
Oh, sorry, Phil.
One thing that worries me about this, and it's not, I've got to make sure it's not a question and debate, that if we head down this track of not putting, and I fully understand not putting the wastewater into the harbour, when we run out of our consent for putting our waste out to Christchurch waste out to sea, are we going to? Is this a thin end of a wedge?
Can we stick to the matter at hand?
Okay, no,
Yeah.
I'm just.
That was the question, wasn't it?
No.
It was. It certainly ended on a high note, which indicated a question. Sarah. Oh, James.
Yeah, it will be a very quick debate. I'm not actually comfortable with it. My preference is to reject and send back. I think what is completely clear is the deluge of discontent that exists around it. We're not at a point that works. Simple as that.
James.
They say timing is everything, and I'm thrilled to have been elected to this body to be in a position to make a decision today. Thank you for the summary of why time is up on this. This has been going on for decades, and it's about time we did something. So very simply, I'm in support of this. I will acknowledge that there are people that are opposed to this, but that's one of the things that we have to do. We have to make decisions, the best decisions for all of the people, not just some. So I'm in support of this.
Kia ora, thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. Just in response to a couple of things, the situation that we find ourselves in Christchurch and in Akaroa is actually not unique. There are towns and cities around the country currently going through similar processes as us, and all of them are finding that there is no perfect situation. What we do is not precedent setting in any sense of the word. There is plenty going on in this space, and lots of other places are struggling with it. There is not a deluge of discontent either, apart from a few emails that we've had in the last week. The actual submissions themselves were very evenly split on the harbour outfall. 53% were in favour of the harbour outfall, not overwhelming in any sense of the word. And we also, as panel members, had emails that you wouldn't have received in support of the work that we had done and the recommendations that we were making. The inner bays option isn't perfect, but it's the option that the hearings panel have recommended following a thorough and robust process that has spread out over many years. It meets our obligations to Ngāi Tahu, our legal obligations, is the lower cost of the feasible land-based options, keeps the treated wastewater closest to the communities where it may be reused in the future when regulations allow, and in the meantime we get an additional nearly 40 hectares of native bush restored in what was once an abundant and thriving forested harbour and food basket for local runanga. Alongside that, it's clear we would face extensive legal challenges and costs should we go with the harbour outfall option, with a low chance of success due to the feasibility of the land-based options. The time delay would lead to consequential escalation costs in the delivery of whatever option we ended up with after the legal action had finished. And in the meantime, things would go on, and we would be stuck with wastewater at Takapuniki. The community still has a clear role to play, and they had in the past, and they will in the future with this scheme. There's a community reference group to be set up to help monitor progress and inform the design, a local employment scheme for the planting and maintenance of the native bush, and new heritage signage and access. It is time we did this. It's the right thing to do, and I'm really happy to recommend this to the council today.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
Just indicate Sam, Catherine, James. Thank you. That's carried.